No, this can't be right. Where is it?
It's just a mistake, Nana. We'll get this sorted out.
I don't believe that. Something's not right here. No, it can't be. Not gone. Oh, Lord. Please answer. Hello. I need to inquire about my late husband's pension. My name is Ro, and I have the account number.
The morning my pension disappeared, my son smiled across my kitchen table and told me not to worry. Government systems mess up all the time, Mom. I'll handle it. I almost believed him until I discovered the money hadn't vanished at all. It had landed exactly where someone wanted it to. I said nothing. I let one more pension check clear into that account. Then instead of calling my son, I picked up the phone and called the pension office. Sometimes the truth doesn't need an argument. It only needs one person willing to wait long enough for a liar to feel safe. If this story touches something you've seen in your own family, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Please like this video if you enjoy emotional family stories and subscribe so you won't miss the next one. And before you go, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. ORS planned meals, checked deliveries, and greeted children who often arrived hungry long before their teachers noticed anything was wrong. Thousands of students passed through my serving line over 4 decades. Some returned years later with children of their own. Many still called me Miss Claudine. It always made me smile. The work was exhausting, but it gave structure to my life. When retirement finally arrived 6 months after Richard's funeral, I wasn't ready for the silence. No ringing school bells, no delivery trucks backing into the loading dock, no children asking if there would be cinnamon rolls on Friday. Just an empty house that suddenly sounded much bigger than it really was. My son Jason noticed the loneliness before I admitted it to myself. He started stopping by more often. Sometimes he brought takeout. Sometimes he'd mow my lawn before I even realized it needed cutting. Other days, he simply sat at my kitchen table drinking coffee while we talked about ordinary things. His daughter Olivia came with him whenever volleyball practice allowed. She was 16, then bright, funny, and endlessly curious. She reminded me so much of Richard that sometimes I'd have to look away before she noticed my eyes filling with tears. Jason always seemed patient. Mom, he'd say while fixing a loose cabinet hinge or replacing a smoke detector battery. Dad handled all the financial stuff. You don't have to figure everything out by yourself anymore. At first, I resisted. I've paid bills my whole life. I know, he'd answer gently. But online banking changes every year. Let me make things easier. There was nothing unreasonable about that. Technology had moved faster than I had. Passwords, security codes, verification emails, two-factor authentication. Every company seemed determined to make simple things complicated. Jason worked in information technology for a regional logistics company. Computers made sense to him. He helped me set up automatic payments for utilities. He organized my online accounts. He even created a notebook filled with usernames and instructions in neat handwriting. Looking back now, I wonder whether trust disappears all at once or whether it leaves one tiny piece at a time without us noticing. Back then, I never questioned his intentions. He was my son. The little boy who used to insist on carrying every grocery bag into the house because he wanted to help Mom. The teenager who stayed awake all night beside Richard during chemotherapy years before we learned the treatments had worked. The young father who cried harder than anyone else when Richard died. People don't suddenly become strangers. That's what makes betrayal so difficult. It wears the face you've loved your entire life. One Saturday morning, about 4 months before everything unraveled, Jason arrived carrying a leather folder. "I need a favor," he said. "What kind of favor?" "Nothing major." He spread several documents across the dining room table. The pension office updated some security policies after all those identity theft cases. They're asking retirees to sign new authorization forms. I adjusted my reading glasses. There were several pages. Boxes, initials, signatures, government logos. Everything looked official. "I'm not sure I understand all this." "You don't need to," Jason replied with an easy smile. It's mostly administrative. They're just making sure direct deposits continue without interruption. He pointed where I needed to sign. I skimmed the first page. The language was full of legal terms and administrative references that meant very little to me. Are you sure this is everything, positive? I already handled mine through work. They're just updating everyone's records. I trusted him. Why wouldn't I? I signed where he indicated. Initialed 3 pages, dated another. Jason gathered everything back into the folder with practiced efficiency. I'll drop these off Monday. He kissed my forehead before leaving. Love you, Mom. I love you too. For several months, life continued normally. On the third Wednesday of each month, my pension arrived exactly as expected. The deposit wasn't extravagant, but after decades of careful saving and a modest mortgage that Richard and I had paid off years earlier, it allowed me to live comfortably. I wasn't wealthy. I didn't need to be. I simply appreciated knowing that every month the money I had earned through decades of early mornings and hard work would appear exactly where it belonged. Until one Wednesday it didn't. I noticed the missing deposit while balancing my checkbook after breakfast. At first I assumed I had opened the banking app too early. Sometimes deposits appeared later in the morning. I waited until noon. Nothing. By 3 o'clock I refreshed the page again. Still nothing. A strange feeling settled into my stomach. Not panic. Not yet. Just confusion. I called the bank. The representative verified my identity before politely reviewing my account. No, Mrs. Weatherford, she said. We haven't received any pension deposit today. Could it simply be delayed? It's certainly possible. Sometimes incoming transfers arrive a day later. Her answer sounded reasonable. I thanked her and hung up. That evening, Jason stopped by unexpectedly. He walked into the kitchen carrying Chinese takeout like it was any other Wednesday. You look worried, he said. My pension hasn't shown up. He barely hesitated. Oh. Then he shrugged. Government systems mess up all the time. He sounded almost too calm. I wouldn't worry about it. You think it'll show up tomorrow? I'm sure it will. He opened a carton of sesame chicken. If not, I'll call the pension office for you. The offer sounded thoughtful. It should have reassured me. Instead, something about the speed of his answer lingered in my mind long after he left. For the first time in years, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. Not because the missing money frightened me, because somewhere deep inside a tiny voice whispered a question I wasn't ready to hear. How had Jason become so certain there was nothing to worry about? Before anyone even knew what had happened, the pension deposit still hadn't arrived the next morning. I tried not to let my imagination get ahead of the facts. Government offices made mistakes. Banks experienced delays. Computers failed. After spending more than 40 years working in a public school system, I knew bureaucracy could turn even the simplest task into a week-long ordeal. Still, something felt different. Not because the money was missing, because Jason had sounded so certain. At 9 o'clock, I poured myself another cup of coffee and stared at my phone. I had already looked up the number for the Ohio Public Employees Retirement Office twice that morning. My finger hovered over the call button. Before I could press it, my phone rang. Jason. I hesitated before answering. Morning, Mom. Good morning. I figured I'd check on you. That's thoughtful. I've already started looking into your pension. I frowned. You already have? Yeah. I made a couple of calls first thing this morning. His answer came almost too quickly. They're having system issues. I slowly sat down at the kitchen table. You talked to someone already? Uh-huh. They're updating payment processing. Nothing to worry about. I thought government offices didn't open until 8:30. There was a tiny pause. Well, I left a message first. His explanation sounded reasonable. Almost. I can call too, I offered. No. The word came out sharper than either of us expected. Another pause. Then Jason laughed. I mean, you don't need to. You'll probably end up sitting on hold for an hour. I'll handle it. I looked through the window at the maple tree Richard had planted 20 years earlier. Its branches barely moved in the morning breeze. I don't mind waiting. I do. His voice softened again. Mom, you've dealt with enough stress these past couple of years. Let me fix this. I thanked him. We ended the conversation. But after hanging up, I didn't feel reassured. I felt dismissed. Jason had always been protective. Even as a teenager, he'd insisted on carrying every heavy box, changing every light bulb, fixing every loose cabinet door. There was kindness in those habits. But over the past year, something had shifted. Protection had slowly become control. Not obvious control, subtle control. The kind that disguised itself as love. I insisted on logging into my online accounts because the passwords were confusing. He preferred my financial mail be sent to his house first, just in case anything looked suspicious. Whenever a company called me directly, he wanted to know exactly what they had said. At the time, none of it had seemed unusual. Now, every memory returned wearing a different face. By lunchtime, I decided to visit my bank. Not because I believed the problem was there, because I wanted someone to look me in the eye while explaining what they knew. The young banker recognized me immediately. "Mrs. Weatherford, good to see you." "You too." She reviewed my account carefully. There aren't any rejected deposits. No pending deposits. No unusual withdrawals. Everything looks perfectly normal. Except my pension isn't here. She nodded sympathetically. "If the sender hasn't transmitted the funds to this account, we won't see anything." "This account?" She smiled politely. "Yes." I noticed her wording. "This account. Not your pension. Not your payment. Just this account." I thanked her and left. Outside, I sat inside my car without starting the engine. The November sky hung low over Columbus gray, enough to make noon look like late afternoon. Richard used to love weather like this. He'd call it thinking weather. He believed cloudy days forced people to slow down. Maybe he was right. Because for the first time, I stopped trying to explain Jason's behavior away. Instead, I started paying attention. That afternoon, Olivia called. "Hi, Grandma." Her cheerful voice instantly lifted my spirits. "What are you up to? Homework. Your dad says your pension still hasn't shown up." I froze. I didn't tell him anything today. "Oh." She sounded confused. "He mentioned it while we were eating lunch." My heart skipped. Lunch. Jason had known my pension still hadn't arrived hours before I had spoken to anyone. I kept my voice calm. "What exactly did he say?" "He just said the government still hadn't fixed your payment." "When did he say that?" "I don't know. Maybe around noon." "Interesting." I hadn't checked my account again until nearly 1 o'clock. I smiled anyway. "Thanks for checking on me, sweetheart." "I love you." "Love you too, Grandma." After hanging up, I opened one of Richard's old spiral notebooks from the kitchen drawer. He used to write grocery lists inside it. The remaining pages were blank. I wrote the date. Then I wrote everything I remembered. Wednesday. Pension missing. Jason immediately says government error. Thursday morning. Jason calls first. Claim system problems. Tells me not to contact pension office. Olivia says Jason already knew payment still missing before I confirmed anything. I underlined that last sentence twice. It wasn't proof, but it was strange. Very strange. That evening, Jason stopped by again. This time he brought groceries. "I picked up your favorite soup." "Thank you." We unpacked the bags together. He chatted about work, traffic, football, Olivia's upcoming volleyball tournament. Everything except my pension. Finally, I asked, "Did the pension office tell you anything else?" He barely looked up from the refrigerator. "They're still working on it." "When do they expect it?" "Probably Monday." "Did they give you a reference number?" He paused. "A what?" "For the inquiry." Most agencies generated case numbers for payment investigations. Jason shrugged. "I didn't ask." "You usually ask questions." "I guess I forgot." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I changed the subject. There was no reason to let him know I had started noticing details. When he left, I stood at the front window, watching his truck disappear around the corner. Then I returned to the kitchen table. I looked at Richard's notebook again. One page wasn't enough anymore. The next morning, I bought a hardcover journal from a small stationery store downtown. Nothing fancy, just black leather with lined pages, every conversation, every date, every dollar amount, every explanation, every inconsistency. If my instincts were wrong, the notebook would become nothing more than an embarrassing reminder that I had doubted my own son. I could live with that. But if my instincts were right, I wanted facts, not emotions, not assumptions. Facts. Over the following week, Jason continued calling almost every day. Each conversation sounded reassuring on the surface. They're processing it. They're updating records. They're backed up. They're fixing everything. The explanations kept changing. Only one thing stayed exactly the same. Every single time I suggested contacting the pension office myself, Jason found a new reason why I shouldn't. They're impossible to reach. They'll only transfer you around. They already know about your case. I've got it under control. One afternoon, I casually asked, "Which office have you been speaking with?" He answered immediately, "The downtown office." "There isn't one downtown anymore," I said quietly. "It moved to the east side almost 3 years ago." Silence. Just for a second. Then he cleared his throat. "That's what I meant. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't." But as I closed my notebook that evening, I realized something had changed inside me. I was no longer trying to convince myself Jason was innocent. I was waiting to discover exactly how far the truth would go. By the following Monday morning, I had reached a decision. If Jason truly believed the pension office was fixing my missing payments, then my visit wouldn't interfere with anything. And if he had been lying to me, every additional day I waited would only make it easier for the truth to disappear. I dressed more carefully than usual. Richard used to tease me that I only wore my navy blue blazer for weddings, funerals, and important conversations. This qualified as the third. As I buttoned the jacket, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. The woman looking back at me had more silver hair than she did 2 years earlier. Grief had a way of aging people in places that photographs couldn't always capture. But my father's words suddenly came back to me. When you're asking for the truth, stand up straight. Honest people never need to look at the floor. I smiled faintly. Then I picked up my purse and drove across Columbus toward the Ohio Public Employees Retirement Services building on the east side of town. Jason believed I thought the office was still downtown. He also believed I wouldn't go there myself. Both assumptions were about to become problems for him. The building wasn't particularly impressive. A modern brick structure with large windows and a flagpole standing beside the entrance. Inside, everything smelled faintly of coffee and printer paper. A receptionist greeted me warmly. "Good morning." "Good morning. How can we help you today?" "My name is Claudine Weatherford. I believe there's a problem with my monthly pension." She asked for my driver's license before printing a visitor badge. "Someone will be with you shortly." 5 minutes later, a woman in her mid-50s approached carrying a tablet. "Mrs. Weatherford." "Yes. I'm Karen Mitchell. We spoke briefly by phone several years ago when you retired." Her smile was professional without feeling cold. She led me into a private office overlooking the parking lot. "What seems to be the problem? My pension payment never arrived." "When was your last successful deposit?" I gave her the date. Karen typed quietly. The only sounds in the room came from her keyboard. Then she stopped. Her expression changed almost imperceptibly. Not alarm, more like careful concentration. She clicked through several additional screens before looking back at me. "Mrs. Weatherford." "Yes. I'd like to verify a few things." "Of course. Your pension is still active." "I expected that." "There hasn't been any interruption in payments." I frowned. "What do you mean?" Karen turned the monitor slightly so I could see. "The payments have continued on schedule." I stared at the screen. Every monthly pension payment appeared exactly where it should. Every amount matched. Every payment had been successfully deposited. Except, not into my account. I leaned closer. "I'm sorry. I don't recognize those last four account numbers." Karen looked at me carefully. "You don't?" "No." She clicked another page. Our records indicate you requested a direct deposit change approximately 4 months ago. My heartbeat slowed instead of speeding up. Whenever something frightened me, I became strangely calm. I requested it. According to these records. She rotated the monitor further. There. I looked at the document. My name, my address, my social security number. Everything was correct. At the bottom sat a signature. Mine. Or something very close to mine. For a moment I wondered if age had simply made me forget. Then another memory surfaced immediately. I had never changed banks. Not once. Richard and I had opened our checking account nearly 35 years earlier. There had never been a reason to move it. I didn't submit this. Karen didn't interrupt. She simply listened. I've never seen this document before. She nodded slowly. I understand. May I ask something? Please. Who delivered it? She typed again. It was received through our secure document portal, electronically. I don't use document portals. I barely know how to upload photographs. Karen gave the smallest smile. I appreciate your honesty. She clicked through several more screens. The account change passed identity verification. How? It included the required authorization. My eyes returned to the signature. It looked convincing, close enough that most people would probably accept it without another thought. But I had signed my name tens of thousands of times during my career. Purchase orders, payroll forms, food safety reports, inventory sheets, permission documents, insurance paperwork. I knew my own handwriting. Something wasn't right. The C in Claudine curved slightly differently. The final D leaned too far forward. The signature looked like mine, if someone had practiced copying it. Karen watched me silently. I can request copies of everything if you'd like. I'd appreciate that. There may be several pages. I want every one. She nodded. I'll print the entire authorization packet. While the printer hummed outside her office, Karen folded her hands together. Mrs. Weatherford, have you shared access to your financial records with anyone? The question was gentle, not accusatory. I hesitated. My son has helped me with paperwork since my husband passed away. She didn't react. He understands computers better than I do. I see. He also helped me sign some retirement documents a few months ago. Karen simply wrote something in her notebook. No conclusions, no assumptions, just notes. When she returned carrying a thick stack of papers, she laid them carefully across the desk. There are 6 documents. I began turning pages one at a time. The first contained the account change request. The second listed routing numbers. The third authorized electronic verification. The fourth confirmed identity. The fifth included acknowledgement language, written in dense legal terminology. The sixth made my stomach tighten. It wasn't because of the signature. It was because of the date. 4 months earlier. Exactly the Saturday Jason had brought the leather folder to my dining room table. I remembered that morning perfectly. Coffee, blueberry muffins, football playing quietly on television. Jason smiling as he pointed where I should sign. They're just updating pension security policies. I looked back at the document. Not one page mentioned routine security updates. Every page referred specifically to changing the destination of future pension payments. I felt suddenly cold. Karen broke the silence. Mrs. Weatherford, I don't remember signing these. I believe you. The words surprised me. You do, she nodded. I've worked here for 27 years. I've learned that signatures tell only part of a story. That sentence lingered with me. Signatures tell only part of a story. She continued carefully. If someone misrepresented the purpose of these forms before you signed them, she chose her next words very carefully. That would concern us. I took a slow breath. I need copies. You'll have them. I also need to know where my pension has been deposited. Karen's expression became more cautious. I can provide the account information connected to your file. She handed me another sheet. Only the last 4 digits appeared. No account holder's name, no bank balance, no ownership information. Privacy laws prevented that. Still, Those 4 numbers were enough to tell me one thing. The money had not disappeared. It had gone exactly where someone wanted it to go. Karen closed the folder. I don't want to alarm you, but before making any accusations, she looked directly into my eyes. Please let us review everything internally. I slowly gathered every copied document into my purse. I won't confront anyone. Not yet. As I stood to leave, Karen walked me to the lobby. If you remember anything else about those documents, I'll call. Outside, I remained beside my car for nearly 5 minutes without unlocking the door. The autumn wind pushed dry leaves across the parking lot. 4 months. Every pension payment, every reassuring conversation, every excuse Jason had offered. Suddenly, they all fit together far too neatly. I reached into my purse and removed Richard's old notebook. Beneath the final entry, I wrote one new sentence. The money never disappeared. Someone simply changed where it was told to go. Then I underlined it once, very slowly. I drove home from the pension office with the radio turned off. Normally, I liked having something playing in the background. Old country songs, local news, classical music on Sunday mornings. Silence had become uncomfortable after Richard died, so I had developed a habit of filling every room with some kind of sound. Not that afternoon. I needed to hear my own thoughts. The folder Karen Mitchell had given me rested on the passenger seat beside me, secured with a large binder clip. Every few minutes I glanced at it, as though the papers inside might somehow rearrange themselves and produce a different answer. They never would. Someone had changed my direct deposit. Someone had submitted authorization forms using a signature that looked enough like mine to pass inspection. And the timing matched the exact Saturday Jason had asked me to sign those routine security updates. I pulled into my driveway but didn't get out immediately. Instead, I reached for Richard's notebook again. Below my last entry, I added another. Pension office confirms deposits never stopped. 4 months redirected. Documents dated the same day Jason brought paperwork to my house. I underlined the date twice. Facts. Only facts. No accusations. No conclusions. Just facts. That discipline had helped me survive 4 decades working in public schools. Whenever there was a disagreement between parents, teachers, or administrators, emotions only complicated things. Documentation solved problems. Memories faded. Records didn't. I carried the folder inside and placed it on my dining room table. The same table where Jason had smiled while pointing to places for me to sign. For a long time, I simply stared at the chair where he had been sitting that morning. I could almost hear his voice. It's just routine, Mom. They're updating security. Nothing complicated. The words hadn't technically been instructions, they had been reassurance. That realization hurt more than I expected, because reassurance only works when someone already trusts you. Jason hadn't forced me to sign anything, he had simply used the trust I freely gave him. My phone rang just after 4 o'clock. Jason. I let it ring twice before answering. Hi, Mom. Hello? Any luck with the pension? I closed my eyes for a second. No. That's frustrating. It is. I'll call them again tomorrow. You don't have to keep worrying about it. His voice remained calm, almost comforting. I don't want you stressing yourself out. I looked at the folder across the room. I'm managing. You sure? Yes. He hesitated. Did you stay home today? The question sounded casual, too casual. I ran a few errands. What kind of errands? I smiled to myself. Jason had never cared about my errands before. Oh, grocery shopping. A few stores. I needed fresh vegetables. Technically, it wasn't a lie. I had stopped at the grocery store on my way home. Good. You deserve a quiet day. We talked another 2 minutes about Olivia's upcoming volleyball tournament before ending the call. As soon as I hung up, I wrote down every question Jason had asked. Did you stay home today? What kind of errands? Why would those questions matter, unless he was worried about where I had gone? That evening, I spread every document across the dining room table. One by one, I compared the signatures, the pension authorization, old Christmas cards, A mortgage payoff document from years earlier. Richard's life insurance paperwork. Medical consent forms. Bank records. At first glance, every signature looked nearly identical. But after 30 minutes, I began noticing tiny details. My real signature always slanted slightly upward. The pension signature stayed perfectly level. I always connected the letters A and U in Claudine. The authorization separated them. The tail of my final D curved gently. The forged version ended with a sharper angle. Nothing dramatic, nothing obvious. But enough. Enough that once I noticed the differences, I couldn't stop seeing them. The next morning, I called someone I hadn't spoken with in almost 6 months. Frank Donovan answered on the second ring. Claudine, Frank. Well, this is a nice surprise. Frank had retired from the teachers' union around the same time Richard retired from the electric company. Although I had worked in food services rather than teaching, the union had represented our entire district staff. Frank had spent nearly 40 years helping school employees understand contracts, retirement benefits, and pension regulations. If anyone outside the pension office understood paperwork, it was him. Can I come by? Of course. Everything okay? I hope so. His home sat only 15 minutes away. When I arrived, he welcomed me inside with 2 mugs of coffee already waiting on the kitchen table. You look worried. I am. Without saying another word, I handed him Karen's folder. Frank adjusted his reading glasses and began examining each page slowly. He didn't rush, didn't interrupt, didn't speculate. Nearly 20 minutes passed before he finally leaned back in his chair. When did you first notice the missing deposits? I explained everything. Jason's explanations, the phone calls, the changing stories, the visit to the pension office. Frank listened carefully. Then he asked something unexpected. Have you confronted Jason? No. Good. I blinked. You think I should? No. I think you absolutely shouldn't. His answer surprised me. Why? Because right now you don't know exactly what happened. I know enough. You know enough to be suspicious. That's different. Frank tapped the paperwork with one finger. If Jason truly committed fraud, the worst thing you can do is warn him before understanding the full picture. What do you mean? If someone realizes they're being investigated, they start deleting, changing, explaining, moving money, creating new stories. He looked directly at me. Evidence disappears. I swallowed. So what do? You stay patient. I don't feel patient. I know. But patience wins cases. Emotion loses them. Frank stood and walked toward his office. When he returned, he carried a magnifying glass. I want to show you something. He placed my signature from an old pension enrollment form beside the new authorization. Look at the pressure. I leaned closer. Pressure. When people naturally sign their names, the pen presses harder in familiar places. He pointed to several letters. Here. And here. I compared both signatures. The authentic one contained tiny variations in thickness. The newer signature looked unnaturally even, almost careful, almost practiced. As if someone copied it slowly, I whispered. Frank nodded. Maybe. But don't jump ahead. He removed the magnifying glass. There's another thing bothering me. What? The timing. He pointed toward the dates. If Jason really believed these were routine security updates, why didn't he simply tell you they changed your bank account? I stared at him. Because there wasn't a good answer. Frank continued quietly. Most fraud cases don't begin with stealing. They begin with rationalizing. I'll borrow it. I'll pay it back. She'll never notice. He sighed. Then 1 month becomes 2. 2 becomes 4. Eventually the lie becomes bigger than the money. I felt tears gathering. This is my son. I know. I keep hoping there's another explanation. I hope so too. He reached across the table and gently closed the folder. But hope isn't a strategy. What is? He smiled sadly. Evidence. He walked to a bookshelf and removed a legal pad. Starting today, I want you to write down every conversation, every text, every visit, every excuse. no matter how small. I've already been keeping notes. His eyebrows lifted. Good. Keep doing it. Then he said something I never forgot. Claudine, the truth is strongest when it doesn't need your memory to survive. I drove home feeling strangely calmer. Not happier, certainly not relieved, but calmer. For the first time since my pension disappeared, I realized I wasn't facing this alone. Someone else had seen the documents. Someone else had noticed the inconsistencies. Someone else believed patience mattered more than anger. That night, I bought a second notebook. The first one contained facts. The second would contain copies of every document, every timeline, every date, and every conversation going forward. If Jason had truly betrayed me, I wasn't going to defeat him with accusations. I was going to defeat the lie with the truth. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I understood that those were not the same thing. For the next 10 days, I became an actress in my own life. It wasn't a role I wanted to play, but Frank Donovan was right. If Jason had spent months convincing me that everything was normal, then the safest thing I could do was let him believe his performance had worked. Every smile felt heavier than the one before it. Every conversation became another opportunity to listen instead of react. I reminded myself of one simple rule every morning before I got out of bed. Don't chase the truth. Let it come to you. The first test came sooner than I expected. Jason arrived at my house the following Saturday carrying 2 bags of groceries. I noticed your refrigerator was looking empty last week, he said as he walked inside. Thought I'd save you a trip. That's sweet of you. He unpacked milk bread, fruit soup, coffee, and a frozen apple pie. Watching him move comfortably around my kitchen hurt more than I wanted to admit. This was the same kitchen where he had learned to bake chocolate chip cookies when he was 10. The same counter where Richard had taught him how to carve a Thanksgiving turkey. The same table where he'd helped Olivia build her 6th-grade science project. Every corner of this room carried memories. Now each memory seemed to ask the same painful question. When had everything changed? Jason opened the refrigerator. Have you heard anything new? I shook my head. No. I suppose these things take time. He nodded as though my answer confirmed something. They do. I've been calling every couple of days. I'm sure they'll straighten everything out. I poured coffee for both of us. I appreciate all your help. He smiled. You're my mother. That's what sons are supposed to do. I watched his face carefully. There wasn't the slightest sign of guilt. No trembling hands. No nervous laughter. No inability to meet my eyes. If I hadn't already seen the paperwork, I would have believed every word. That frightened me. Not because he was convincing, because lying had apparently become comfortable. We sat together talking about ordinary things for nearly an hour. Rachel's school had started preparing for holiday concerts. Olivia's volleyball team had qualified for regional playoffs. His company was changing health insurance providers. Completely ordinary conversations. Until he casually asked, "Your pension should be deposited again next Wednesday." I stirred my coffee slowly. I suppose it should. If it doesn't come this time, we'll really have to push them. My spoon stopped moving for just a fraction of a second. He knew the exact deposit schedule. Of course he did. Most children eventually learn when their retired parents receive pension payments. There was nothing suspicious about that. But there was something strange about the confidence in his voice. Almost as though he expected the payment to arrive somewhere. Just not where I thought it would. After Jason left, I opened my notebook. Saturday. Jason mentioned Wednesday's pension before I did. Appeared completely relaxed. No concern about missing deposits. 3 days later, my monthly pension was due again. I barely slept Tuesday night. Not because I needed the money immediately. My savings could comfortably cover several months of expenses. This wasn't about paying bills anymore. This was about proof. Frank had repeated the plan so many times that I could almost hear his voice. Let one more payment clear. Once the money moves again, the pattern becomes stronger. Patterns are harder to explain away than isolated mistakes. Wednesday morning arrived gray and cold. I made coffee but forgot to drink it. At exactly 8:15, I opened my banking app. Nothing. No deposit. No pending transaction. I closed the application without checking again. Instead, I waited. By noon, my phone rang. Jason, exactly as I expected. Morning, Mom. It isn't morning anymore, he laughed. I guess not. I've been busy. So have I. Did your pension show up? There it was. The question arrived less than 4 hours after deposits normally processed. No, he sighed dramatically. Unbelievable. I'm going to have another conversation with them. I leaned back in my chair. I don't want you wasting your lunch break because of me. It's no trouble. I've already been dealing with them. Another statement. Another small inconsistency. Every time he spoke, his story grew a little larger. I appreciate that. I'll let you know what they say. We ended the call. I didn't move, didn't write anything, didn't even pick up my notebook. Instead, I looked out the kitchen window toward the bird feeder Richard had built years ago. A pair of cardinals landed together. Richard used to say cardinals were reminders that people we loved never really left us. I wasn't sure I believed that anymore, but I did believe Richard would have wanted me to stay calm. At precisely 1:30 that afternoon, I drove back to the pension office. Karen Mitchell greeted me almost immediately. I was expecting you. You were, she smiled gently. I checked your account this morning. My stomach tightened. And the payment processed successfully. I know it didn't reach my account. No, it didn't. She invited me into her office again. The same chair, the same desk, the same quiet professionalism. Karen logged into the pension system. The payment was deposited at 3:07 a.m. Same destination account. Yes. She turned the monitor toward me. The last four account numbers matched the paperwork sitting inside my purse. Exactly. The same account had now received 5 consecutive monthly pension payments. Karen looked directly at me. Mrs. Weatherford, may I ask you something? Of course. Did you intentionally wait until this payment was completed before coming back? For the first time since this ordeal began, I smiled. Yes. She slowly nodded. I thought you might have. I needed to know whether it would happen again. And now you do. She opened another file. I've documented today's transaction. Can the account still be changed back? It can. But I would advise waiting just a little longer. I looked at her surprised. You would? Karen folded her hands. If fraud occurred, preserving today's transaction strengthens the timeline. Her words echoed Frank's advice almost perfectly. Evidence, not emotion. Evidence. I also contacted our internal compliance department this morning. My heartbeat quickened. You did? They've begun reviewing the authorization documents. What happens now? Karen hesitated. We'll need additional information. I'll provide whatever you need. I believe that. She lowered her voice. Mrs. Weatherford, I want to ask one more difficult question. I nodded. Has anyone besides you had regular access to your financial paperwork? I answered honestly. My son. She didn't seem surprised. Does he help manage your online accounts? Yes. Did he assist you with the documents that changed the direct deposit? I took a slow breath. Yes. Karen wrote several notes before closing the file. Thank you. I know these aren't easy questions. No, they aren't. Before I left, she handed me a printed confirmation showing the exact date and time the newest payment had been deposited. I slipped it carefully into my folder. As I walked toward my car, my phone vibrated again. A text message from Jason. Just got off the phone with the pension office. They're still working on it. Don't worry. Love you, Mom. I stared at the screen for several seconds. Then I looked down at the confirmation in my hand. Jason had just told me the pension office was still working on it, but I now possessed official documentation proving the money had already reached the same redirected account only hours earlier. Without realizing it, Jason had just become the one person who confirmed the timing I needed. I folded the paper carefully and placed it inside my folder. For months, I had wondered whether I was imagining things. Not anymore. The lies were no longer isolated. They were becoming predictable. And predictable lies leave trails that honest people never have to explain. The text message stayed on my phone for a long time. Just got off the phone with the pension office. They're still working on it. Don't worry. Love you, Mom. If I had received that message 2 weeks earlier, I would have smiled and thanked my son for taking care of me. Now I knew something Jason didn't. At the exact moment he claimed the pension office was still working on it, I had been sitting inside Karen Mitchell's office, holding printed confirmation that my pension had already been deposited into the same unauthorized account for the 5th consecutive month. He wasn't trying to calm me anymore. He was maintaining a lie. I folded the confirmation carefully and placed it inside my expanding folder of evidence. When I arrived home, I called Frank. He answered immediately. Well, it happened again. I figured it would. The payment cleared. Same account. There was a brief silence. And Jason. He texted me 20 minutes later. He claimed the pension office was still investigating. Frank let out a slow breath. Good. I almost laughed. Good. I know that sounds strange. But yes. Every additional lie creates another piece of evidence. I'm tired of evidence. I'd rather have my son back. I know. His voice softened. I truly know. But right now your job isn't fixing Jason. It's protecting yourself. We talked for another 15 minutes. Then Frank said something I hadn't expected. I think it's time to involve Karen again. I already did. No. I mean officially. What do you mean? Ask whether the pension office has a fraud compliance division. They do. They've already started reviewing the paperwork. Good. Now ask them not to reverse anything yet. I frowned. Not reverse it? Why? Because once an investigation officially begins, preserving the existing records becomes important. They'll want the destination account exactly as it is. They'll want every timestamp, every authorization, every payment. The idea made sense. Even so, waiting felt unbearable. Frank, what if he moves the money? If he does, that's evidence too. He paused. The truth has a habit of leaving fingerprints. After hanging up, I called Karen Mitchell. She transferred me directly to her office. Mrs. Weatherford, I was expecting you might call. I wanted to ask something. Go ahead. Should I allow the account information to remain unchanged for now? Karen answered without hesitation. Yes. Our compliance department agrees. We've already preserved electronic copies of today's transaction. We'd like to keep everything exactly as it is until additional reviews are complete. Will someone contact me? They will. And Mrs. Weatherford? Yes. Please don't confront anyone. The request sounded almost identical to Frank's. I wasn't planning to. I'm glad. We've seen investigations become much more difficult after families confront each other too early. I promised her I would wait. After ending the call, I opened my notebook again. For nearly an hour, I copied every event into a clean timeline. Dates, phone calls, texts, deposits, office visits, every conversation with Jason, every meeting with Karen, every suggestion from Frank. When I finished, the timeline covered 6 full pages. Looking at everything together changed something inside me. Separated, each event could have been explained away. A misunderstanding, bad memory, administrative confusion. Together, they formed a pattern. And patterns don't happen by accident. That Friday evening, Rachel invited me to dinner. We haven't seen you all week, she said over the phone. Olivia keeps asking when Grandma's coming over. Part of me wanted to decline. Pretending everything was normal had become exhausting. But another part reminded me why I couldn't withdraw. Rachel and Olivia hadn't done anything wrong. If anything, they were just as unaware as I had been. I'd love to come. Jason greeted me at the front door with his usual smile. Mom. Good to see you. You too. Nothing about him suggested he believed anything was wrong. The smell of roasted chicken filled the house. Olivia hugged me before returning to finish setting the table. Rachel carried mashed potatoes from the kitchen. For a moment, everything looked exactly like dozens of family dinners we'd shared over the years. Normal, comfortable, safe. I wondered how many lies could exist inside a room that looked so ordinary. Dinner conversation revolved around school sports and Thanksgiving plans. Rachel talked excitedly about one of her students winning a statewide writing contest. Olivia described a dramatic volleyball match that had gone into 5 sets. Jason mostly listened, until Rachel mentioned replacing their aging washing machine. "We've been putting it off," she sighed. "They're expensive." Jason shrugged. "We'll figure something out." Rachel smiled. "We always do." I noticed something. A flicker. Barely noticeable. Jason looked away when she said it. Almost guilty. Not enough for anyone else to notice. Enough for me. Later that evening, while Rachel washed dishes and Olivia walked the dog, Jason and I found ourselves alone on the back porch. Cold air drifted across the yard. He leaned against the railing. "You've seemed quieter lately." "I've had a lot on my mind. The pension, among other things." He nodded sympathetically. "I'm really sorry you're dealing with that. I know how stressful money problems can be." Money problems. The phrase lingered in my mind. I hadn't complained about money, only missing deposits. There was a difference. "I've been thinking." "About what?" "About how quickly life changes." He smiled. "It sure does. You know, when Dad died, I promised myself I'd always look after you." "I remember." "I meant it." "I know." The words came out almost automatically. Then he surprised me. "If things ever got really difficult financially, I hope you'd tell me." "I would. We're family." He smiled again. "We always take care of each other." For one painful second, I almost asked him, "Why? Why did you do this? Why was my pension in another account? Why did you lie over and over?" But Karen's voice echoed in my head. "Please don't confront anyone." Frank's followed immediately afterward. Evidence first, emotions later. So instead, I simply nodded. "I appreciate that." As I drove home later that night, something kept bothering me. Jason had mentioned money several times during dinner. Rachel talked about the washing machine. Jason emphasized financial stress. Then he asked whether I'd tell him if I needed help. The conversation felt rehearsed, as though he were quietly steering every subject back toward finances. Saturday morning brought another surprise. Karen Mitchell called. "Mrs. Weatherford." "Good morning." "Our compliance review uncovered something you should know." My pulse quickened. "What is it?" "The authorization packet wasn't simply uploaded. It was uploaded through an authenticated online profile." "I don't have an online profile." "We know. That's one of the reasons we're escalating this." I sat down immediately. "Escalating, yes. Our compliance director has referred your case to our internal fraud unit." "What happens now?" "They'll review login records, submission history, electronic verification, and related documentation." "Will they find out who uploaded it?" "We hope so." Karen hesitated before continuing. "Mrs. Weatherford, cases involving possible elder financial exploitation receive very serious attention." The phrase struck me. Elder financial exploitation. Until that moment, I had thought of this as my family's private tragedy. Karen reminded me it wasn't simply a family disagreement. It might be a crime. After ending the call, I looked through the window toward Richard's old workshop. It had been almost 3 years since he'd last built anything inside it. He used to tell Jason something whenever they worked together. Doing the right thing is usually harder than doing the easy thing. I wondered whether Jason remembered hearing those words, or whether somewhere along the way, he had simply stopped believing them. 3 days after Karen told me my case had been referred to the fraud unit, my phone rang while I was trimming the last of my rose bushes before winter. The caller ID displayed a number I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Claudine Weatherford, speaking. My name is Detective Megan Brooks with the Financial Crimes Unit. Karen Mitchell from Pension Services asked if I could contact you." I straightened slowly, my gardening gloves still covered with dirt. "Yes. Is this a good time to talk?" "It is. I'd actually prefer to meet in person. When, if you're available this afternoon." I looked across my backyard. Nothing had changed. The maple tree Richard planted still stood beside the fence. The bird feeder still swayed gently in the breeze. The neighborhood looked exactly as peaceful as it had the week before, yet somehow everything felt different. I'll be there. The Financial Crimes Office occupied the third floor of a county administration building downtown. Unlike the pension office, there was very little decoration. Gray walls, metal filing cabinets, framed certifications. Everything about the place suggested efficiency rather than comfort. Detective Megan Brooks greeted me herself. She was younger than I expected, perhaps in her late 40s, dressed in a navy blazer instead of a police uniform. Mrs. Weatherford. She shook my hand firmly. Thank you for coming. She led me into a conference room where a recorder sat in the middle of the table. I'm recording our conversation with your permission. That's fine. This is simply to ensure accuracy. I nodded. I understand. She pressed the record button. Please begin wherever you think the story begins. For nearly an hour, I explained everything. Richard's death, Jason gradually helping with my finances, the paperwork, the missing pension, the visit to Karen Mitchell, Frank Donovan's advice, the notebook, the text messages, the second pension payment I intentionally allowed to clear. Detective Brooks interrupted only to clarify dates or ask for copies of documents. When I finished, she organized everything into a neat stack. You've done something most victims don't. What? You documented events as they happened. I wasn't trying to build a case. I was trying to understand what was happening. She smiled. Fortunately, those are often the same thing. She opened a folder already sitting on the table. I'd like to explain what we've confirmed so far. My hands tightened around my coffee cup. The destination account receiving your pension. She looked down at her notes. Belongs to a single individual. I waited. Whose account is it? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she asked another question. Before I tell you, are you absolutely certain no one besides your son regularly handled your financial paperwork? No one. No accountant. No. No financial advisor. No. No caregiver. I've lived alone since Richard died. She nodded once. Then I'll answer your question. She slid a document toward me. The account holder's name had been partially redacted for privacy reasons, but one line remained fully visible because it directly concerned my complaint. Primary account holder, Jason Michael Weatherford. I stared at the page. Although I had expected it, seeing it in writing felt entirely different. Hope finally disappeared. Not because I wanted Jason to be guilty, because the possibility that he wasn't had just become much smaller. I closed my eyes for several seconds. I'm sorry, Detective Brooks said quietly. So am I. She gave me time before continuing. We've also reviewed transaction activity. What did you find? She turned another page. The pension deposits didn't remain in the account very long. How long? Usually less than 48 hours. Where did they go? Multiple destinations. She pointed toward a chart. Credit card payments. Personal loan balances. Cash withdrawals. Electronic transfers. There wasn't a pattern I could immediately recognize, just money leaving almost as quickly as it arrived. He spent it. It wasn't really a question. It appears so. Can you tell what he bought? Some payments went toward debt. Others require additional subpoenas before we can identify the final recipients. I nodded silently. Debt. Not luxury vacations. Not expensive jewelry. Debt. That didn't excuse anything. But it explained something. Jason hadn't redirected my pension because he wanted extra spending money. He had needed money, desperately. Detective Brooks seemed to read my thoughts. Financial desperation often plays a role in these cases. I raised him better than this. I believe you. I keep asking myself where I failed. She leaned forward. Mrs. Weatherford, you didn't teach your son to redirect your pension. He made that decision. Please don't accept responsibility for someone else's choices. Her words were kind. I wasn't ready to believe them. As we continued reviewing the records, another detail emerged. The account has only one authorized owner. What does that mean? It means your daughter-in-law isn't listed. Rachel. No. No joint ownership. No authorized access. No secondary cardholder. I looked up. So she doesn't know. We can't say what she knows. But financially, Detective Brooks tapped the paperwork. This account belongs solely to Jason. I thought back to dinner only a few nights earlier. Rachel worrying about replacing the washing machine. Jason assuring her they'd figure something out. Had she known their mortgage was in trouble? Did she know he had been using my retirement money? Or had she been hearing the same reassuring lies I had? A heavy sadness settled over me. This story wasn't getting smaller, it was getting larger. Before I left, Detective Brooks asked one final question. Has Jason mentioned financial problems recently? I thought carefully, not directly. But he keeps bringing money into conversations. He asks whether I'm worried. He offers to help. He tells me not to stress. She made another note. Anything else? I remembered the look on his face when Rachel mentioned buying a washing machine. The split second where confidence became worry. He reacts strangely whenever household expenses come up. What do you mean, oh, he changes the subject? Or promises everything will work out? But he never explains how. She nodded thoughtfully. That's helpful. Driving home. I couldn't stop thinking about Rachel. She had welcomed me into her home, cooked dinner, invited me to Olivia's volleyball games. She had hugged me goodbye every holiday. If she truly knew nothing about Jason's actions, then she was living inside a lie just as completely as I had. Late that evening, my phone buzzed. It was Olivia. Hi, Grandma. Hi, sweetheart. Can I ask you something? Always. She hesitated. Has Dad seemed different lately? The question caught me off guard. What makes you ask? I don't know. He's been nervous. He keeps going into his office and closing the door. He never used to do that. I chose my words carefully. Sometimes adults carry worries they don't talk about. I guess. Another pause. Then she spoke so quietly I almost missed it. I heard Mom crying last night. My heart sank. Did you ask why? No. I don't think she wanted me to hear. I looked out the living room window into the darkness. Something inside that house had already begun to crack. Maybe Rachel didn't know everything, but she knew enough to be frightened. After we said goodbye, I wrote another note in my journal. Olivia says Rachel has been crying. Jason increasingly secretive. Financial pressure affecting entire household. Then I closed the notebook. The investigation had answered one important question. The account belonged to Jason, but it had also created a far more painful one. If Rachel wasn't part of the scheme, how much of her marriage had been built on secrets she hadn't yet discovered? As I turned off the light, I realized the next chapter of this story would no longer be only about stolen money. It would be about a family slowly discovering that the person they trusted most had been living two completely different lives. After meeting with Detective Megan Brooks, I expected the next few days to be filled with phone calls, paperwork, and updates from investigators. Instead, I heard almost nothing. At first, the silence frustrated me. Then I remembered something Frank had told me years ago when our school district was investigating missing equipment. The quietest part of an investigation, he had said, is usually when people are working the hardest. I repeated those words to myself every morning. Waiting had become part of my job. Still waiting didn't stop life from moving forward. Thanksgiving was only 3 weeks away. Rachel sent a group text asking everyone to confirm what dishes they planned to bring. Jason volunteered to smoke the turkey. I offered pumpkin pie. Olivia claimed mashed potatoes before anyone else could. Reading the cheerful messages made my chest ache. Our family still looked perfectly normal from the outside. Inside, invisible cracks continued spreading. 3 days later, Detective Brooks finally called again. We've identified additional financial activity connected to your son's account. I sat down before answering. What kind of activity? We're still reviewing everything. But I can tell you this. She paused briefly. Your pension wasn't the first source of emergency money. I frowned. What does that mean? We've located several personal loans, multiple balance transfers, and evidence that Mr. Weatherford borrowed money from private individuals. Friends, some, relatives, were still confirming. My stomach tightened. Has he been doing this for a long time? We believe his financial problems began well before your pension was redirected. That single sentence changed everything. Until then, I had imagined the pension theft as one terrible decision, one desperate moment, one enormous mistake. Now another possibility appeared. Perhaps Jason hadn't crossed one line. Perhaps he had been crossing smaller lines for years. I thanked Detective Brooks before ending the call. For several minutes, I simply sat in silence. Richard used to say that every serious problem leaves small footprints long before anyone notices the disaster itself. Maybe this was one of those times. Maybe I had been seeing the footprints without recognizing them. The following Saturday, Olivia asked if I would watch one of her volleyball matches. I'd love to. The high school gym buzzed with energy. Parents filled the bleachers. Students cheered. Pep bands played between sets. For 2 hours, I allowed myself to forget investigations, paperwork, and missing pensions. Olivia played beautifully, confident, focused. She reminded me of Jason at that age. Competitive without becoming cruel. Determined without losing her kindness. After the match, she climbed into the bleachers beside me while her teammates celebrated on the court. Grandma, yes. Can I tell you something? Always. She glanced toward the far end of the gym where Jason and Rachel were talking. Dad's been acting weird. I kept my expression calm. In what way? He keeps getting phone calls. So, he walks outside every time. He never answers them in front of Mom. I listened carefully. He says they're work calls. But he works from home. Nobody from work calls him on Saturday nights. Children often notice details adults ignored. Not because they understood more, because they weren't busy explaining things away. What else have you noticed? She hesitated. I probably shouldn't say. If it makes you uncomfortable, you don't have to. She looked down at her hands. I heard Mom asking Dad about money. When last week. What did she say? I only heard part of it. She asked why another credit card bill was hidden in his office. My heartbeat slowed. And what did your dad say? He told her it belonged to work. Did she believe him? I don't know. I went upstairs. I squeezed her hand gently. You did the right thing. She smiled weakly. I just wish everybody would stop arguing. So do I. Driving home later that evening, I couldn't stop thinking about what Olivia had shared. Rachel had found a hidden credit card bill. Jason had offered another explanation, another lie, or another half-truth. The distance between those two possibilities seemed to shrink every day. Monday morning brought another surprise. Frank invited me to breakfast. We met at a small diner we'd both loved for years. The waitress greeted us by name. Neither of us ordered immediately. Frank noticed my expression before I spoke. You learned something. Detective Brooks believes Jason's financial problems started long before my pension. Frank nodded slowly. I suspected as much. You did. People rarely commit sophisticated financial fraud as their first dishonest act. They usually practice on smaller decisions first. His words unsettled me. What kind of smaller decisions? He shrugged. Borrowing money they can't repay. Hiding debt. Opening new credit accounts. Moving balances around. Lying to spouses. Lying to themselves. I stirred my coffee quietly. I don't know which hurts more. The stolen money, or realizing I may not know my own son anymore. Frank didn't answer immediately. Finally, he said, "Those aren't always the same thing." I looked up. What do you mean? The son who learned honesty from you. He existed. The man making these choices exists too. One doesn't erase the other. That thought stayed with me. Perhaps the tragedy wasn't that Jason had always been dishonest. Perhaps it was that somewhere along the way, he had stopped becoming the man Richard and I raised. 2 days later, Detective Brooks called again. This time I need to ask about other family members. What about them? Has your son ever borrowed money from relatives? I thought carefully. Not from me. At least, not directly. Anyone else? My younger sister loaned him money years ago when Olivia was born. Did he repay it? Eventually. Anyone else? I suddenly remembered something. My cousin Harold mentioned Jason asking about a short-term business investment last Christmas. Did Harold invest? No. He said the proposal didn't make sense. Detective Brooks thanked me. Then she asked one final question. Has Jason ever discussed gambling? I answered without hesitation. No. Never. I've never even seen him buy a lottery ticket. We're simply exploring possibilities. I understand. After hanging up, I walked into Richard's old workshop. The room still smelled faintly of cedar and machine oil. His tools remained exactly where he'd left them, perfectly organized. Every wrench, every hammer, every screwdriver. Richard believed that disorder usually reflected something deeper. If your toolbox becomes chaos, he'd often say, your thinking probably has too. I wondered what Jason's life looked like when nobody else was watching. How many unopened bills waited inside desk drawers? How many overdue notices had he hidden from Rachel? How many promises had he made that he knew he couldn't keep? Friday evening. Rachel stopped by unexpectedly, alone. I hope I'm not interrupting. Never. She looked exhausted. Dark circles framed her eyes. Her smile appeared forced. I just needed to get out of the house for a little while. We sat in my kitchen drinking tea. For nearly 30 minutes we talked about ordinary things, school, recipes, holiday shopping. Then almost casually she asked, Claudine, has Jason seemed stressed to you lately? The question caught me completely off guard. What makes you ask? She wrapped both hands around her mug. I don't know. He's distracted. He stays up late. He jumps whenever his phone rings. He keeps saying everything's fine. But it doesn't feel fine. Every instinct inside me wanted to tell her everything. The redirected pension, the investigation, the account, the documents. Instead, I remembered Detective Brooks's instructions. Please don't confront anyone. Rachel wasn't the problem. But if I revealed the investigation too early, Jason would know within the hour, so I answered honestly without revealing anything. I think he's carrying more than he wants people to see. She looked down. I've been thinking the same thing. Before leaving, she hugged me tightly, longer than usual. I'm glad you're in our lives. So am I. After she drove away, I stood on my porch watching her taillights disappear into the darkness. Rachel didn't know the truth yet, but she could already feel it. Because lies have a way of changing a person's behavior long before anyone discovers what they're hiding. And as I closed the front door that night, I realized the investigation was no longer uncovering only missing money. It was uncovering years of secrets that had quietly poisoned every relationship inside Jason's home. The Monday after Rachel visited me, Detective Megan Brooks called before I had even finished my first cup of coffee. Mrs. Weatherford, we have enough information to move into the next phase. I set my mug down carefully. What does that mean? It means we're no longer trying to determine whether fraud occurred. A long pause filled the line. We're now documenting exactly how it happened. For the first time since this nightmare began, I heard certainty in her voice, not suspicion. Not theory, certainty. She asked if I could meet her at the Financial Crimes Office later that morning. When I arrived, the atmosphere felt different from my previous visit. Instead of a single folder waiting on the conference table, there were several. Each one carried neatly printed labels. Electronic records, bank activity, pension documents, digital evidence. Detective Brooks was joined by another investigator named Daniel Pierce, a quiet man who specialized in digital forensics. After we exchanged greetings, Megan opened the first folder. We've completed the preliminary review of the electronic submission used to change your pension account. I leaned forward. Were you able to identify who submitted it? Daniel answered. We identified the device. My heartbeat quickened. The upload came from a residential internet connection. He slid a document toward me. The address had been partially covered to protect the investigation, but one line remained visible. The street name. It was Jason's neighborhood. Daniel continued. The authorization wasn't submitted from the pension office. It wasn't submitted from a public library. It wasn't submitted from a business. It originated from a private home internet connection. I didn't need him to say the address aloud. I already knew. Megan turned another page. The electronic account used to upload the documents was created only 3 days before your direct deposit information changed. And after that, I asked, it was never used again. So someone created it, specifically to submit those documents, Daniel finished. I closed my eyes. That required planning, not impulse, planning. For months I had quietly hoped Jason had made one terrible decision during a desperate moment. Instead, every new piece of evidence suggested preparation. Preparation hurt far more than desperation. Megan continued. We also received records from the receiving bank. What did they show? The account belongs exclusively to Jason Weatherford. We already knew that. Yes. But now we know something else. She opened another folder containing several printed bank statements. The pension deposits were not left untouched. They were transferred within hours. She pointed to highlighted entries. The November pension payment arrived at 3:07 a.m. At 9:42 a.m., approximately 60% was used to pay a credit card. At 11:18 a.m., another transfer paid a personal loan. The remaining balance was withdrawn over the next 2 days. She flipped to another page. The October payment followed almost exactly the same pattern. Then September. Then August. Every month looked nearly identical. Money entered. Money disappeared. There were no signs that Jason had been saving it for me. No indication that he planned to return it later. He had been spending it almost immediately. Megan looked at me carefully. I know this is difficult. I nodded silently. Richard and I had spent decades teaching Jason that every dollar represented someone's hard work. He knew exactly what that pension meant. He knew how many early mornings stood behind every payment. And still, he spent it before the week was over. Daniel spoke again. We also subpoenaed metadata connected to the uploaded authorization documents. I'm sorry, I said. What exactly is metadata? He smiled politely. It's information about the files themselves. When they were created. When they were modified. Sometimes which software was used. And the files appear to have been scanned shortly before submission. So they weren't old documents. No. They were newly created digital copies. My mind returned immediately to the Saturday Jason had brought the leather folder. He hadn't simply asked me to sign papers. He had probably scanned them afterward. The realization made me feel physically ill. Megan waited until I looked back up. Mrs. Weatherford, I need to ask another question. Of course. Did Jason own a scanner? I almost laughed. He insisted everyone should own one. He bought a wireless printer and scanner for his home office last Christmas. Daniel quietly wrote something down. That matches what we expected. The room fell silent for several moments. Finally, I asked the question I had been avoiding. What happens now? Megan folded her hands. We're preparing a complete investigative report. Will Jason be arrested? It's too early to make decisions about criminal charges. First, we need every piece of documentation. We don't leave gaps. That answer reminded me of Frank. Evidence. Always evidence. Never assumptions. Megan continued. We're also waiting for records connected to several personal loans. Why? We believe they may explain motive. Motive. She nodded. We know what happened. Now we're determining why. On my drive home, I kept replaying that last sentence. Determining why. For weeks, I had been asking myself exactly the same question. Why? Why would my son risk everything over money? Why would he gamble with his marriage? With Olivia's respect? With our family? Later that afternoon, I received an unexpected visitor, Frank. He stood on my porch holding 2 cups of coffee. I had a feeling today might be difficult. It was. We sat on the back deck overlooking Richard's workshop. I told him everything. The internet records, the scanner, the bank transfers, the payment timeline. When I finished, Frank remained quiet. Finally, he asked, "Do you remember Jason's first car?" I smiled faintly. "The old blue pickup. What happened when he backed it into the mailbox?" "He tried to hide the dent." Frank nodded. "Until Richard noticed." I remembered that conversation perfectly. Jason had been 16, terrified, certain his father would yell. Instead, Richard had walked outside, looked at the damaged truck, and said something simple. "I'm disappointed you lied. The dent was an accident. The lie was a choice." Frank looked toward the maple tree. "Your husband understood something important. Mistakes grow. Lies multiply. I think that's what's happened here." The words settled heavily between us, because this no longer looked like one lie. It looked like dozens, each one protecting the previous one, each requiring another. Until eventually, the truth became almost impossible to face. The next morning brought another surprise. Rachel called. "Claudine," her voice trembled. "Are you busy?" "No." "Can I come over?" "Of course." When she arrived 20 minutes later, she looked exhausted. She held a credit card statement in one hand. "I found this." I looked down. The balance exceeded $23,000. My breath caught. "I didn't know we owed this much." She sat heavily at my kitchen table. "Jason told me it belonged to work." Her eyes filled with tears. "I called the credit card company. They said it's a personal account." I chose my next words carefully. "What did Jason say when you asked again?" "He became angry. He said I didn't trust him." She shook her head slowly. "I've been married to him for 18 years. I don't know what's happening anymore." I reached across the table and held her hand. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then Rachel whispered something that broke my heart. "I keep wondering how many things I don't know." I didn't answer, because I was wondering exactly the same thing. As Rachel drove away later that afternoon, I stood alone on my front porch. The investigation had uncovered forged documents, electronic records, bank transfers, digital evidence. But watching Rachel walk back to her car taught me something no report ever could. The stolen pension wasn't the only thing Jason had taken. Little by little, over many months, he had stolen trust from every person who loved him. And I had a feeling the hardest truths were still waiting to be uncovered. The first snow of the season fell the morning Jason finally came to my house without calling first. I was standing in the kitchen watching white flakes settle across Richard's old workshop roof when I heard tires crunch across the driveway. I looked through the window. Jason climbed out of his truck carrying no groceries, no coffee, no smile. That alone told me something was different. He knocked only once before letting himself inside. "Mom, I'm in the kitchen." He removed his coat, slowly hanging it on the same rack he had used since he was a teenager. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. "I made coffee," I said. "Good." His voice sounded tired. Not sad. Not frightened. Exhausted. I poured 2 cups and placed one across from me. He sat without touching it. Finally, he looked up. "Have you been avoiding me?" I kept my expression calm. "I don't think so. You've seemed different." "I've been busy." "Busy doing what?" "Life." He let out a humorless laugh. "You've never answered questions like that before." "People change." "So I've noticed." The room grew quiet again. Outside, snow continued drifting across the yard. Jason rubbed both hands together before speaking again. "Rachel says you've seemed distracted." "I've had things on my mind." "Is this still about your pension?" I looked directly into his eyes. "Partly. I told you I'm handling it." "I know you've said that." He leaned forward. "Mom, you trust me, don't you?" There it was. Not an explanation. Not new information. A question built entirely around emotion. A month earlier, I would have answered without hesitation. Now I answered carefully. "I've always wanted to." His shoulders stiffened. "Wanted to." I held his gaze. "Trust isn't something people say. It's something they prove." For the first time since this entire ordeal began, I saw genuine fear flicker across his face, only for a second. Then it disappeared. What does that mean? It means exactly what I said. He looked away towards the window. You think I've done something wrong? I think there are questions that still need answers. His jaw tightened. Questions from who? I shrugged gently. My own. He stood and began pacing the kitchen. I've spent months trying to help you. I know. I've called people. I've filled out paperwork. I've worried about you. I know. Every answer I gave seemed to frustrate him even more. Then why does it feel like you're treating me like a stranger? Because strangers hadn't stolen my pension. But I didn't say that. Instead, I quietly replied, because something doesn't make sense. He stopped pacing. What doesn't make sense? I folded my hands together. You always have an explanation. So, before anyone asks a question, his eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? The missing deposits, the phone calls, the delays, the paperwork. Every single time you already knew exactly what had happened. He laughed once, a sharp defensive laugh. Someone has to stay organized. Maybe. But sometimes it felt like you knew too much. Silence. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Then he changed directions completely. Did someone say something to you? What do you mean, the bank? The pension office? Anyone, I answered honestly. I've spoken with several people. His breathing changed almost imperceptibly. What did they tell you? That they're reviewing everything. He stared at me for several long seconds. Everything. Yes. Another silence. This one lasted nearly half a minute. Finally, he reached for his untouched coffee. It had already gone cold. You know, he said quietly, after Dad died, I promised myself I'd never let you struggle. I remember. I've tried. I know you've tried. Then why do I feel like I'm being judged? I wanted to tell him because facts don't lie, because forged signatures don't explain themselves, because 5 pension deposits don't accidentally enter the wrong account. Instead, I simply asked, Jason, when was the last time you slept through an entire night? The question caught him completely off guard. What? You look exhausted. He rubbed his forehead. I've been working. Only working. He hesitated. Mostly. Mostly. Not entirely. A tiny word. Another tiny crack. Just then, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. For the first time since I'd known him, he didn't answer immediately. Instead, he silenced it. Work, I asked. He nodded too quickly. Yeah. Important. It can wait. The phone buzzed again, then again. 3 calls within less than a minute. I watched him. He looked trapped. Finally, he stood. I should probably take this. Of course. He stepped onto the back porch and closed the door behind him. Through the kitchen window, I could see him pacing, talking rapidly, running one hand through his hair. Whatever conversation he was having wasn't calm. When he returned several minutes later, his face looked pale. Everything okay? Fine. You don't look fine. It's work. Just work. He grabbed his coat. I need to go. So suddenly, I've got a problem I have to deal with. Before opening the door, he turned back toward me. Mom? Yes. If anyone asks you questions. I waited. About me. He swallowed. Just remember I'm doing my best. Then he left. I stood in the doorway long after his truck disappeared. His final sentence repeated itself over and over inside my head. If anyone asks you questions about me, he hadn't asked whether someone would ask questions. He had assumed they already were. Less than an hour later, Detective Brooks called. I was just about to contact you. Jason came to my house. She became very quiet. What happened? I told her everything, every question, every pause, every change in tone, especially his final words. When I finished, she asked, Did you tell him about the investigation? No. Good. Then she surprised me. Mrs. Weatherford, I need you to know something. What? We interviewed Jason this morning. I gripped the phone tighter. You did? Yes. It was voluntary. He wasn't under arrest. He denied redirecting your pension. My heart sank. He denied everything. He acknowledged helping you with paperwork. But he claimed you personally requested every change. I closed my eyes. He said that, yes. He also stated that you wanted him to temporarily manage your retirement funds because online banking had become confusing. The words felt like another betrayal. Not only had Jason taken my pension, he had built an entirely new story to justify it. A story that portrayed me as confused, dependent, unable to manage my own finances. Detective Brooks continued. He couldn't explain several inconsistencies. What inconsistencies? The electronic records, the bank transfers, and most importantly, she paused. He couldn't explain why the money immediately left his account every month. I slowly sat down. What happens now? We're requesting one final set of records. What records? The original login authentication from the document portal. If those records match what we already have. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. The investigation was almost complete, and for the first time I realized something heartbreaking. Jason wasn't simply protecting himself anymore. He was willing to sacrifice my reputation to save his own. He had turned me from a victim into part of his defense. That realization hurt more than the missing money ever had, because pensions can be replaced. Trust like that rarely can. I barely slept after Detective Brooks told me Jason had claimed I wanted him to manage my pension. The words echoed through my mind all night. She asked me to handle it. She was having trouble with online banking. She wanted me to temporarily manage the money. Every sentence sounded believable if you didn't know me. But Karen Mitchell knew I had never requested a new account. Frank knew I had carefully managed every household bill for decades. The investigators had my notebooks, my timelines, and the pension records. Jason's story wasn't collapsing because I argued with him. It was collapsing because the documents refused to agree with him. That realization gave me a strange sense of peace. I didn't need to convince anyone. The facts would do that for me. 3 days later, Detective Brooks called again. Mrs. Weatherford, we'd like you to come in this afternoon. Has something happened? Yes. Her voice was calm, but I could hear a quiet confidence beneath it. I think you'll want to hear this in person. When I arrived, both Detective Brooks and Daniel Pierce were already waiting. A new folder sat on the table. Unlike the previous ones, this one contained photographs, computer screenshots, login records, timestamps. Daniel opened a laptop. We received the authentication logs from the document portal. I leaned forward. Did they match? They matched almost perfectly. He pointed to the first screen. This account was created using Jason Weatherford's personal email address. I frowned. I thought he denied creating it. He did. Daniel clicked again. The confirmation email was opened from the same device that created the account. Another click. The password was reset twice. Both requests originated from the same residential internet connection. Another click. The uploaded documents were submitted less than 20 minutes after the files were scanned. He looked directly at me. There is no evidence that anyone else accessed the account. For several moments, I simply stared at the screen. The room remained completely silent. Finally, I whispered, so he can't honestly say someone else used his computer. Daniel slowly shook his head. Not based on what we've recovered. Detective Brooks slid another sheet toward me. This is equally important. It was a timeline. Every electronic event appeared in chronological order. Document scanned. Portal account created. Verification email opened. Login confirmed. Direct deposit change submitted. Confirmation received. Everything happened within a little over an hour. This wasn't something completed over several days, Megan explained. It appears to have been planned as a single task. I closed my eyes. 1 hour. One carefully planned hour had changed nearly 6 months of my life. There is one more development, Detective Brooks said. We interviewed Rachel yesterday. I looked up immediately. How is she? Heartbroken? I expected that. Did she know? Megan answered without hesitation. No. She provided us with financial records from their household. I frowned. She volunteered them. Yes. After we explained the nature of the investigation. What did they show? They confirmed several things. Megan opened another folder. Jason maintained a separate checking account Rachel didn't know existed. I felt my stomach tighten. The pension account. No. A different account. So there were two. Yes. The redirected pension first entered one account. Then portions were transferred elsewhere. Another secret. Another lie. Megan continued. Rachel also provided copies of household budgets. She believed they were paying down debt. Were they? Not at the rate Jason claimed. The room grew quiet again. I thought about Rachel crying in my kitchen, wondering why her husband seemed different, wondering why bills kept appearing. She hadn't been pretending. She truly hadn't known. The following afternoon, Rachel called me. Could we meet? Of course. She arrived carrying a cardboard storage box. Inside were neatly organized folders, utility bills, mortgage statements, credit card statements, tax records. She looked exhausted. I've been going through everything. I gently touched the edge of the box. You don't have to show me any of this. I want to. She sat heavily in the chair across from me. I don't think I know my own husband anymore. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, she removed a folder labeled Personal Loans. I found these hidden in the basement. There were 6 separate loan agreements. Different lenders, different dates, different balances. Some had already gone into collections. Others were months behind. Did you know about these? I asked quietly. She shook her head. He told me our only debt was the mortgage. I slowly turned another page. A personal loan. Then another. Then another. The oldest agreement was nearly 4 years old. 4 years. Long before my pension had ever been redirected. I remembered what Detective Brooks had said. The pension wasn't the beginning. It was the last solution Jason reached for after everything else had begun falling apart. Rachel wiped away tears. I keep asking myself what I missed. You didn't cause this. I should have noticed. No. He chose to hide it. She lowered her head. I trusted him. So did I. For the first time since this ordeal began, we cried together. Not because either of us had done anything wrong, because we were mourning the same person, the version of Jason we thought we knew. Later that week, Olivia stopped by after school. She carried her backpack into my kitchen and immediately hugged me. Grandma, yes. Mom says things are going to change. I nodded gently. They might. Are they getting divorced? The question broke my heart. I don't know. She looked down at the floor. I heard Dad crying. That surprised me. Dad? She nodded. I've never heard him cry before. Last night. What happened? He was in his office. I walked past. I heard him saying. She hesitated. What did he say? He kept saying. I ruined everything. Tears filled her eyes. I wanted to go inside. But Mom stopped me. I pulled her into another hug. None of this was her fault. None of it was Rachel's fault. Jason's decisions had become a storm that now surrounded everyone who loved him. 2 days later, Detective Brooks called again. We're preparing our final interview with Jason. What happens after that? He'll be presented with the evidence. Everything. Everything. The electronic records. The banking records. The pension documents. The interview statements. The digital authentication. The timeline. She paused before adding, we've also completed the handwriting comparison. I held my breath. And the examiner concluded the signatures on the authorization documents show significant indications of simulation. What does that mean? They appear to have been copied from authentic samples rather than written naturally. Exactly what Frank had suspected with nothing more than a magnifying glass. I smiled sadly. He'll be pleased he was right. Sometimes experience notices things before technology confirms them. After ending the call, I walked into Richard's workshop once more. His old toolbox still sat exactly where he had left it. I opened the top drawer. Inside lay his favorite measuring tape. Richard often told Jason, "Measure twice, cut once. Take your time, check your work, tell the truth." Those lessons had built our home, our marriage, our family. Somewhere along the way, Jason had stopped measuring his choices. Instead, he had begun measuring only what he thought he could get away with. As I closed the toolbox, I realized the investigation itself was almost over. The evidence was complete. The lies had nowhere left to hide. Now only one question remained. When Jason finally saw everything laid out in front of him, would he continue protecting the lie? Or would he finally tell the truth that had been waiting beneath it all? The week before Christmas, Detective Megan Brooks called with the words I had been expecting for months. "We've completed the investigation." For a moment, I couldn't answer. I simply stood in my kitchen looking at the Christmas tree Olivia and I had decorated only a week earlier. White lights reflected in the front window, while snow drifted quietly across the neighborhood. "So," I finally whispered, "what happens now?" "We've submitted our findings to the prosecutor's office. And they've decided not to seek an immediate arrest." That surprised me. "They haven't?" "No. This case involves a first-time financial offense, full cooperation from the victim, and the possibility of restitution." I understood immediately. The law was giving Jason one final opportunity to make things right before pursuing criminal charges. "He'll still face consequences," Megan continued, "but there's an opportunity to resolve part of the financial damage if he's willing to cooperate." I thanked her before hanging up. For months I had imagined this phone call. In my imagination I thought I would feel victorious. Instead I felt tired. Justice, I was learning, rarely felt like celebration. Sometimes it simply felt like the end of pretending. 3 days later, Jason asked if we could meet. Not at my house, not at his, at Frank Donovan's office. Frank still volunteered several days each week at the Retirees Association, helping people understand pension paperwork and benefit claims. It was neutral ground. When I arrived, Frank greeted me quietly before leading us into a private conference room. Jason was already there. He looked thinner than he had only a month earlier. Dark circles rested beneath his eyes. His shoulders slumped as though he hadn't slept in days. For several moments, nobody spoke. Finally, Jason broke the silence. "They showed me everything." I nodded. "The login records." Another nod. "The bank statements." I remained silent. "The handwriting report." His voice cracked. "I can't explain any of it anymore." Frank quietly excused himself, closing the conference room door behind him. This conversation belonged to us. Jason stared at the table. I kept thinking, if I could fix everything before anyone found out, then nobody would ever get hurt. I spoke for the first time. "But people did get hurt." "I know." His eyes filled with tears. "I know." He rubbed both hands across his face before continuing. "It started almost 4 years ago, exactly as Detective Brooks had suspected. My company downsized. I lost a promotion. I'd already borrowed money trying to keep up with bills. I thought I'd recover, but every month things got worse." He swallowed hard. "I took out another loan. And another. I kept telling myself I'd pay everything back after the next bonus. There was never a bonus." I listened without interrupting. He continued. "When the credit cards filled up, I opened more. When those filled up, I borrowed from lenders. I couldn't tell Rachel. Why not? I was ashamed." His voice barely rose above a whisper. "Every month I thought I'd fix it before she noticed. But the debt kept growing." I looked at him carefully. "Then Dad died." He nodded. "You trusted me with everything. The passwords, the paperwork, the banking. I didn't plan it. I swear I didn't. But when you signed those pension documents, I realized—" He stopped speaking. "What did you realize?" I asked quietly. "I realized nobody would question it if I changed the deposit." Silence filled the room. He forced himself to continue. I told myself it would only be 1 month. I needed time. I thought I'd replace the money. But the next month another loan came due. And then another. I couldn't catch up. So I kept lying. His shoulders began shaking. I knew every deposit date. I knew every dollar. I hated myself every time the money came in. I believed him. Not because it excused anything, because regret sounded different from excuses. This wasn't denial anymore. It was confession. You forged my signature. Yes. You lied to me. Yes. You lied to Rachel. Yes. You told investigators I wanted you to manage my pension. Jason closed his eyes. I know. That was the worst thing I said. I was desperate. You were protecting yourself. Yes. He looked directly at me for the first time. I'm sorry. I know those words aren't enough. They aren't. No, they aren't. Again, silence. Finally, I asked the question that had lived inside me for months. When you looked at me, when we had dinner, when you hugged me goodbye, what did you feel? Jason didn't answer immediately. Then tears rolled down his face, terrified. I kept hoping you'd never find out. But every time you smiled at me, I felt worse. I stopped sleeping. I jumped every time my phone rang. I knew it was only a matter of time. His confession matched everything Olivia and Rachel had described. The sleepless nights, the secret phone calls, the panic. Not because he had been caught, because he had been living inside a lie. Over the following week, attorneys representing the pension system, Jason's attorney and the prosecutor negotiated a restitution agreement. Jason agreed to acknowledge responsibility for redirecting my pension. He agreed to repay every dollar, interest included. His wages would be partially garnished until the balance was satisfied. He would also perform financial counseling and community service as part of a deferred prosecution agreement. If he violated its terms, criminal charges could still move forward. Detective Brooks explained everything carefully. The agreement doesn't erase what happened. It holds him accountable while ensuring you recover your losses. I signed the paperwork. Not because I wanted to protect Jason from consequences, because the agreement still required him to live with them. Every paycheck, every month, every reminder. The hardest conversation came afterward. Rachel asked to meet me alone. She looked calmer than she had in weeks. I've decided to separate. I nodded sadly. I understand. I don't hate him. I just don't recognize him anymore. She looked out the coffee shop window. Trust doesn't disappear because someone says they're sorry. No, it doesn't. She reached across the table. I want you to know something. What? I never blamed you. I squeezed her hand. I know. Neither did Olivia. Tears filled both our eyes. I hope one day she remembers this family for something besides pain. So do I. That evening I returned home and opened the notebook that had carried me through the darkest months of my life. On the final page beneath the last entry, I wrote one sentence. Truth arrived slowly, but it arrived carrying every fact it needed. Then I closed the notebook for the last time. The investigation was over. The lies had finally stopped. Now the long, difficult work of healing could begin. People often imagine forgiveness as a single conversation, a tearful apology, a warm embrace, a promise that everything will be different tomorrow. Real life has never worked that way. At least it didn't for me. The morning after the restitution agreement was finalized, I woke at 6 o'clock just as I had done for more than 40 years while working at Franklin Ridge Public Schools. For the first time in months, there was no investigator waiting for my phone call, no attorney requesting another signature, no detective asking another question. The crisis was over, but peace hadn't arrived yet. Peace I would eventually learn moves much more slowly than justice. I carried my coffee onto the back porch and watched the sun rise over Richard's workshop. The snow had begun to melt, leaving patches of green grass scattered across the yard. Winter wasn't over, but spring was quietly preparing itself. That felt strangely familiar. My own life wasn't healed, it was simply preparing to heal. A week later, Jason called, not to discuss attorneys, not to explain another lie, not to ask for money. Mom. His voice sounded uncertain. I was wondering if. He stopped. If what? If you'd meet me. I closed my eyes. The old instinct to protect my child still lived somewhere inside me. But another instinct had grown stronger over the previous months. Protect yourself. Where what the park? The one Dad used to take us to. I knew exactly which one he meant. Saturday afternoon, 2 o'clock. When I arrived, Jason was already sitting on a wooden bench overlooking the frozen pond. He looked healthier than the last time I had seen him. Not happier, just more honest. Sometimes those are different things. He stood as I approached. Thank you for coming. I nodded. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. Children played on the nearby playground. A father helped his little daughter learn to ride a bicycle. Life continued around us without knowing our story. Finally, Jason broke the silence. I started financial counseling. I heard. I'm also meeting with a therapist. I hadn't expected that. Why? He gave a tired smile. Because I finally admitted something. What? I didn't just have money problems. I had pride problems. He looked down at his hands. I thought asking for help meant I had failed. So instead, I lied. And every lie required another. He shook his head. I kept believing one more month would fix everything. I know. No. You know what I did. You don't know what it felt like waking up every morning wondering if today was the day I'd lose everything. I listened quietly. I don't say that to excuse myself. I say it because I finally understand something. What? The debt wasn't what destroyed my life. The lying did. I looked across the pond before answering. I've spent months asking myself where I went wrong. You didn't. You raised me to tell the truth. I chose not to. He reached into his coat pocket. I brought something. He handed me an envelope. Inside was a copy of his first restitution payment. It wasn't a large amount, but it represented something much bigger than dollars. Responsibility. I wanted you to have this. I already received copies. I know. But I wanted to hand it to you myself. I folded the receipt and placed it back inside the envelope. Thank you. His eyes filled with tears. I don't expect forgiveness. I know. I don't expect things to go back to normal. They won't. I just... His voice cracked. I hope one day you'll believe I can become a better man than the one who did this. I thought about answering immediately. Instead, I let the silence settle. Finally, I spoke. Jason, when you were 8 years old, you accidentally broke your father's fishing rod. He smiled weakly through tears. I remember. You cried harder than Dad did. He laughed quietly. I thought he'd never forgive me. What did he say? Jason answered without hesitation. He said, tools can be replaced, character takes longer. I nodded. Your father believed people could rebuild. But only after they stopped pretending nothing was broken. Jason wiped his eyes. I'm done pretending. I hope so. Because rebuilding only begins after honesty, not before. Over the following months, our relationship slowly changed. Not back into what it had been. Into something new. He never again handled my banking. He never asked for passwords. He never offered to take care of my paperwork. Instead, he asked permission before discussing anything financial. Sometimes I said yes. Sometimes I said no. He accepted both answers without argument. Those small moments mattered more than grand apologies. Trust isn't rebuilt through speeches. It's rebuilt through consistent behavior. One ordinary day at a time. Rachel officially filed for legal separation in early spring. She later told me it wasn't because she hated Jason. It was because she needed to rebuild her own life without carrying responsibilities she had never agreed to. I still hope he succeeds. She told me that over lunch one afternoon. I just can't be the person responsible for saving him anymore. I understood completely. Loving someone and rescuing them are not always the same thing. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is allow another adult to face the consequences of their own choices. Rachel eventually rented a small townhouse only 15 minutes away, close enough for Olivia to continue seeing both parents, far enough to begin creating her own peace. Olivia adapted more quickly than any of us expected. Teenagers often surprise adults. One Saturday, she helped me plant tulips in the front flower bed. Without looking up, she suddenly asked, "Grandma, yes. Are you mad at Dad forever?" Children have a remarkable way of asking impossible questions. I thought carefully before answering. "No, I'm not. So everything's okay now?" "No, not everything." She frowned. "I don't understand." I smiled gently. "You can love someone and still refuse to trust certain choices they make." "Really?" "Yes. Think about volleyball. If a teammate keeps forgetting to cover her position, you still care about her. But you also learn to watch the court more carefully." Olivia considered that. "So forgiveness doesn't mean pretending nothing happened." "Exactly." She nodded slowly. "I think I understand." By late spring, Detective Brooks called one final time. "I wanted you to know the restitution payments have remained completely current." "I'm glad." "So am I." She hesitated. "I also wanted to thank you." "For what?" "You showed extraordinary patience." "I wasn't always patient." "You were patient when it mattered." "We see many families destroy potential evidence because emotions take over." "You didn't." After ending the call, I sat quietly in Richard's workshop. His old toolbox remained exactly where it had always been. Only now I no longer opened it searching for answers. I opened it because it reminded me of the man who taught our family that character mattered more than comfort. Jason had forgotten that lesson. Then he learned it again, the hard way. As I closed the toolbox, I realized something else had quietly changed. For months, I had introduced myself to detectives, attorneys, investigators as the woman whose pension had been stolen. I wasn't that woman anymore. I was simply Claudine Weatherford, and for the first time in a very long while, that felt like enough. Nearly 1 year after my pension first disappeared, I woke up on the third Wednesday of the month before sunrise. Some habits never leave you. Even after retirement, my body still believed mornings began before the rest of the world opened its eyes. I made a cup of coffee and carried it to the kitchen table. The same table, the same chair, the same window overlooking the backyard. A year earlier, that table had become the place where trust quietly began to unravel. Today, it would become the place where I finally understood what had been rebuilt. At exactly 6:43 a.m., my phone vibrated. I didn't rush. For months, I had dreaded that sound. Now I simply picked it up and opened my banking application. There it was. Ohio Public Employees Retirement System, direct deposit received. My pension had arrived exactly where it belonged. My account. No detours, no hidden transfers, no unanswered questions, no fear. I looked at the screen for several long moments before setting the phone down beside my coffee. Then I smiled. Not because the money mattered more than everything else, because I no longer had to wonder. There is a kind of peace that only arrives when uncertainty finally leaves. That morning I felt it for the first time in a year. Life had settled into a rhythm that looked different than the one I once imagined, but not worse. Just more honest. Rachel and Olivia had moved into a modest townhouse across town. It wasn't large, but every room felt bright. The first time I visited, Olivia proudly showed me the tiny vegetable garden she and her mother had planted behind the fence. "We're growing tomatoes. And basil. And peppers." Rachel laughed. "So far, we're mostly growing optimism." We laughed together. The sound felt unfamiliar at first, then natural. Healing often begins with small conversations about ordinary things. Not dramatic speeches, not grand reconciliations, just ordinary afternoons where people slowly remember how to smile again. Jason continued making every restitution payment exactly as required. Sometimes he sent a brief note with the payment receipt. Other months he sent nothing at all. I appreciated that. Not every apology needs more words. Some apologies look like showing up month after month and doing exactly what you promised to do. He remained in financial counseling. He continued therapy. He accepted extra weekend shifts at work instead of looking for shortcuts. The investigators occasionally updated me. Everything remains in compliance. Payments are current. No violations. Each update became less emotionally significant than the one before. Eventually, they simply became another ordinary part of life, exactly as they should. One Saturday afternoon, Jason asked whether he could help me repair the old fence behind Richard's workshop. For several minutes, I considered saying no. Then I remembered something Richard once told me while we were restoring our first house together. If someone truly wants to rebuild something, eventually you'll have to hand them a hammer. Not because the damage disappears, because rebuilding requires work. Jason arrived carrying his own toolbox. Not mine, his. That small detail mattered more than he probably realized. We worked side by side for several hours, mostly in silence, replacing weathered boards, straightening fence posts, measuring carefully before cutting new lumber. At one point he stopped and smiled sadly. Dad would tell me to measure twice. I looked at him. He would. I finally understand why. I nodded. So do I. No speeches, no dramatic embrace. Just two adults repairing a fence one board at a time. Some relationships heal exactly that way. That autumn, Frank Donovan invited me to speak at a retirement seminar. I don't want to give a speech, I told him. You don't have to. Just tell your story. About 60 retirees attended. Most had recently left careers in education, public service, or city government. People just like me. I stood at the front of the room holding the notebook that had carried me through the investigation. I almost didn't come today, I admitted. But if sharing my experience prevents even one person from going through what I did, then it's worth talking about. For nearly 40 minutes, I explained practical things. Review every bank statement. Read every document before signing. Ask questions. Never feel embarrassed about protecting your own finances. Most importantly, love your family. But don't confuse love with surrendering responsibility. When I finished, dozens of people stayed afterward. Some thanked me. Others shared stories of relatives who had pressured them into signing paperwork they didn't understand. One elderly gentleman quietly admitted he planned to change how he handled his retirement accounts. Walking back to my car that afternoon, I realized something unexpected. What had once been the most painful chapter of my life had quietly become something capable of helping someone else. Richard would have liked that. He always believed difficult experiences should leave behind wisdom, not bitterness. That evening, Olivia came over after volleyball practice. She was preparing college applications now. The little girl who used to bake cookies in my kitchen had somehow become a young woman planning her future. I got accepted, she announced before I could even open the front door. I hugged her tightly. I knew you would, she smiled. I want to study accounting. I laughed in surprise. Accounting? She nodded. I want to help people avoid financial mistakes. I looked at her for several seconds. Then I quietly wiped away tears. Sometimes pain grows into purpose. I never would have chosen the path that brought us here. But I couldn't deny where it had led. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, I walked into Richard's workshop one last time. The old toolbox still rested beneath the workbench. I opened the top drawer. Inside lay his measuring tape exactly where it had always been. Next to it sat a folded note in his handwriting that I hadn't noticed before. It wasn't hidden. I had simply never looked closely enough. The note contained only one sentence. Take care of what's been entrusted to you. That was Richard. Simple, direct, wise. I smiled. I finally understand, I whispered into the quiet room. Before turning off the lights, I closed the toolbox gently. Not because the memories had disappeared, because they no longer needed fixing, they simply needed honoring. As I walked back toward the house, I realized something I wish I had understood much earlier. My greatest victory was never recovering my pension. It wasn't proving Jason had lied. It wasn't winning an investigation. My greatest victory was refusing to let betrayal convince me that kindness was weakness. I learned that I could love my family without abandoning my boundaries. I could forgive without pretending nothing happened. I could trust again, carefully, wisely, and with open eyes. Most importantly, I learned that growing older doesn't mean giving away your voice. Sometimes it means finally using it. And that more than any pension check was the inheritance I hoped to leave behind.